What if the shadiest, most neglected corner of your garden was actually your most valuable growing space? Right now, most gardeners across America, the UK, and all across Europe are doing the exact same thing. They're fighting over the sunniest spots, moving pots around chasing light, cutting back trees, installing mirrors and reflective panels just to bounce a few extra minutes of sunlight onto their vegetable beds. And while all of that is happening, those shady corners, completely ignored, written off, treated like dead zones. But here's the tension nobody talks about. The vegetables that get blasted with 6, 7, 8 hours of harsh direct sun every day, many of them bolt within weeks. They turn bitter. They go tough. They flower too early and become completely inedible. All because they got too much of what everyone says plants desperately need. Meanwhile, the same vegetables grown in partial shade, they stay tender longer. They develop deeper, sweeter flavor. They give you a longer, more reliable harvest window, especially through the brutal heat of summer. So let me ask you something. What if you've been fighting the wrong battle this whole time? What if the shade isn't your problem? It's actually your secret weapon. Stay with me through this video, because I'm about to walk you through 17 vegetables that don't just tolerate shade. They use it, grows better, tastes better, and produces longer than they ever would under direct sun. And by the end of this, you're going to look at every shaded patch in your garden in a completely different way. Welcome to Evergreen Garden Life. If you're new here, please take a second right now to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with a fellow gardener. Drop a comment below, and let us know what time you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Before we even talk about the vegetables themselves, we need to clear something up, because there is a massive misunderstanding that has been circulating in the gardening world for years, and it is costing everyday gardeners their harvests without them even realizing it. Most people hear the word shade, and they immediately picture a dark, damp, lifeless corner where nothing grows. And yes, if we're talking about deep, complete shade where virtually no light reaches at all, then that's a fair concern. But that is not what we're talking about today. Not even close. What we're talking about is what horticulturists and experienced growers call partial shade and light shade. And these are two very different things from the pitch-black darkness your mind might be imagining right now. Light shade is a garden space that receives roughly 1 to 2 hours of direct sunlight each day, alongside a good amount of dappled or reflected light throughout the rest of the day. Think about light filtering softly through tree branches, or sunlight bouncing off a white wall and landing gently on your beds. That's light shade. And it is far more productive than most people realize. Partial shade goes a step further. These are spaces that receive anywhere between 2 to 6 hours of direct sun daily, but spend the remainder of the day in shade. A lot of gardens in terraced houses across the UK, or townhouses in the northeastern United States, or apartment courtyard spaces across Europe fall into exactly this category. North-facing gardens, beds alongside tall fences, spaces tucked under the canopy of mature trees. And here is the thing that changes everything. A whole category of vegetables has evolved specifically to perform in these exact conditions. They don't need more sun. They don't want more sun. In fact, when you give them too much direct sunlight, you're actually working against them. Now here's something that might genuinely surprise you. And this is the part that separates experienced growers from beginners. Shade-grown vegetables very often taste better than their sun-grown counterparts. And this isn't just gardener folklore. This is something that growers across America, Europe, and the UK have been observing for generations. When leafy greens and root vegetables are grown away from harsh, direct sun, something remarkable happens. The intense heat of direct sunlight triggers a stress response in many of these plants. That stress causes them to bolt, meaning they rush through their life cycle, flower prematurely, and become tough, bitter, and completely unpleasant to eat. You've probably experienced this yourself. Lettuce that turns bitter by July. Radishes that go woody before you even get to harvest them. Spinach that bolts the moment summer arrives. But in the shade, that stress response never gets triggered. The plants grow at a calmer, more steady pace. The leaves stay softer and more tender. The roots develop more slowly, which actually concentrates their natural sugars rather than burning them off. Shade-grown greens tend to be sweeter, juicier, and far less bitter than anything you'd pull from a full sun bed in the middle of summer. So the next time someone tells you that your shady garden is a disadvantage, remember this moment. Because the flavor alone is reason enough to start growing in the shade deliberately. Now before we get to the full list of 17 vegetables, there's one more thing we need to talk about. And this is something that catches a lot of shade gardeners completely off guard. It's the soil. And more specifically, how shade changes the way your soil behaves. Here's what happens. Shaded garden beds retain moisture for much longer than sunny beds do, because the sun isn't there to evaporate the water out of the soil quickly. On the surface, that sounds like a good thing. And in some ways it is. But if you walk into a shaded bed with the same watering habits you use on your full sun garden, you're going to overwater your plants without even realizing it. Waterlogged soil suffocates roots, encourages fungal disease, and can rot out an entire bed of vegetables before you notice anything is wrong. On top of that, shaded areas, especially those positioned underneath or near mature trees, can actually be nutrient depleted. Tree roots are remarkably competitive. They spread far wider than most people realize, and they're constantly drawing moisture and nutrients upward from the surrounding soil. So while your shaded bed might look like rich, dark, undisturbed earth, the trees nearby may have already stripped it of much of what your vegetables need to thrive. The solution is straightforward, but you have to be intentional about it. Work generous amounts of compost or well-rotted organic matter into your shaded beds before planting. This improves drainage so the soil doesn't stay waterlogged, while still retaining just enough moisture for your plants. Aim for a soil pH between 6.0 and 7.0. That slightly acidic to neutral range is the sweet spot where most shade-tolerant vegetables can absorb nutrients most efficiently. And adjust your watering schedule. Check the soil before you water rather than watering on a fixed schedule, and only water when the top inch or two of soil feels dry. Get the soil right in your shaded bed, and you've already done more than 90% of gardeners ever do to set themselves up for success. Now let's talk about the vegetables. We're going to go through all 17, and we're going to do it in tiers, starting with the vegetables that need the least amount of sun, and working our way up to those that are comfortable with a little more light, but still perform beautifully without full sun. This way, no matter how shaded your specific space is, you'll know exactly which plants are right for you. Number 1. Spinach. Spinach is one of the most shade-tolerant vegetables in existence. And if you only ever grow one thing in a low-light space, make it this. Spinach genuinely dislikes intense, direct sun. It's a cool season crop through and through. And the moment it gets too much heat and too much sun, it bolts almost immediately, sending up a flower stalk turning bitter, and ending your harvest season far earlier than it should. In a shaded bed, spinach thrives. It grows at the pace it was designed for, producing rich, dark, nutrient-dense leaves over a much longer harvest window. You can grow it in light shade, partial shade, and even in spots that get as little as 2 to 3 hours of gentle morning sun. It's one of the most forgiving, rewarding, and genuinely delicious crops you can grow in a low-light garden. Number 2. Lettuce. Lettuce and shade are a natural partnership that more gardeners need to take advantage of. Direct sun is actually one of lettuce's biggest enemies, especially in the summer months across warmer parts of the US, Southern Europe, and even the UK during July and August. Sun causes lettuce to bolt almost overnight, and once it bolts, the bitterness that follows makes it essentially inedible. But in a shaded bed, lettuce extends its season dramatically. The cooler, more stable soil temperature keeps it productive well into summer, long after sun-grown lettuce has given up entirely. Grow leaf varieties rather than heading varieties for the best results in low light, and you'll be harvesting fresh, crisp salad leaves when your neighbors have nothing left in their beds. Number 3. Arugula. Arugula, also known as rocket in the UK and across much of Europe, is another leafy green that performs far better in the shade than most gardeners expect. Its distinctive peppery flavor is actually best when the plant grows slowly in cooler, shadier conditions. When arugula is exposed to too much direct sun and heat, that peppery flavor quickly becomes sharp, almost unpleasantly bitter. But shade-grown arugula hits that perfect balance, bold, flavorful, and tender right the way through its leaves. Number 4. Kale. Kale has built a reputation as one of the toughest, most resilient vegetables you can grow. And that reputation extends to its performance in low-light gardens. Kale genuinely doesn't need more than 4 to 6 hours of sunlight to thrive. It actually loves cooler soil and cooler air temperatures. And because shade keeps both of those things naturally lower, a shaded bed is almost ideal kale territory. You can plant kale throughout the growing season in a partially shaded spot and enjoy harvests that run almost year-round, particularly in the milder climates found across much of the UK and the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Number 5. Swiss chard. Swiss chard is one of the most underrated vegetables in a shade garden. Its large, colorful stems, red, yellow, orange, white, make it visually stunning even in a darker corner of your garden, and it's just as impressive in the kitchen. Swiss chard handles partial shade with ease, continuing to produce beautiful nutrient-rich leaves without the bolting issues that plague so many other crops in high heat, high sun environments. It's also incredibly versatile. You can harvest the outer leaves continuously while the plant keeps producing from the center, giving you weeks and weeks of yield from a single planting. Number 6. Radishes. Here's where things start to get genuinely interesting. Radishes are one of the fastest growing vegetables on the planet. Under the right conditions, they go from seed to harvest in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. But what most people don't know is that direct sun and heat are actually radishes' worst enemies. Too much sun causes radishes to become woody, pithy, and hollow at the center, completely unpleasant to eat. Shade slows that process down in the best possible way, allowing the root to develop more fully and stay tender all the way through. Grow radishes in a lightly shaded bed in spring or autumn, and you'll get crisp, juicy, perfectly formed roots every single time. Number 7. Beets. Beets are a wonderful addition to a shaded garden, and one that surprises people every single time. They perform beautifully with as little as 4 hours of sunlight. And in a partial shade environment, the shade actually works to their advantage by keeping the roots tender and preventing the leafy tops from scorching in summer heat. Beets also give you a double harvest. The roots themselves and the leafy green tops, which can be cooked and eaten much like spinach. They're productive, nutritious, and perfectly suited to the kind of low-light spaces that most gardeners are ignoring entirely. Number 8. Carrots. Carrots in the shade might raise a few eyebrows, but hear this out. Carrots actually do very well in partial shade, particularly in warmer climates across the southern United States, the Mediterranean regions of Europe, and during summer growing in the UK. In full sun during hot weather, carrots can develop cracks in the root and a sharp, almost unpleasant bitterness. Shade moderates the soil temperature around the developing root, leading to smoother, sweeter, more evenly developed carrots. Sow them directly in loose, well-prepared soil in early spring or late summer for autumn harvests, and let the shade do the rest. Number 9. Broccoli. This is the one that surprises almost everyone. Broccoli, that quintessential, nutrient-dense staple of vegetable gardens across America and Europe, actually prefers partial shade, especially during the summer growing season. Broccoli is a cool season crop at its core, and full sun during warm weather causes it to rush toward flowering far too quickly, producing small, loose, poor-quality heads. Shade keeps the soil and air around the plant cooler for longer, giving the broccoli head time to develop fully, densely, and with far better nutritional quality. If you've ever struggled with broccoli bolting before you could harvest it, moving it to a partially shaded spot might be the single best thing you ever do for that crop. Number 10. Peas. Peas are cool season climbers that genuinely appreciate a break from the sun. They're fast-growing, highly productive, and one of the most rewarding crops to grow in a low-light garden, particularly in spring and early autumn when the sun is lower in the sky anyway. Grow them up a simple trellis or bamboo frame in a partially shaded spot, and they'll produce prolifically. The shade helps maintain the cooler temperatures that peas love, extending your harvest window and preventing the plants from drying out too quickly in the heat of the day. Number 11. Cabbage. Cabbage is a shade garden workhorse. It's one of the most widely grown vegetables across Europe and North America, and it handles partial shade with impressive reliability. Cabbage takes time to mature. It's not a quick crop, but in a shaded bed where soil moisture is more stable and temperatures stay cooler, it develops beautifully without the stress that hot, sunny conditions can introduce. Give it well-composted soil and consistent moisture, and a partially shaded cabbage bed will produce tight, heavy, flavorful heads season after season. Number 12. Collard greens. Collard greens are extraordinarily tough. They tolerate cold, they tolerate heat, and they handle partial shade with complete ease. In the American South, collards are a cultural staple, and experienced growers there have long known that afternoon shade keeps collard leaves tender and productive well into the hotter months. A shaded collard plant can be harvested progressively throughout the season, taking outer leaves while the center keeps pushing new growth, making it one of the most continuously productive crops on this entire list. Number 13. Green onions and scallions. Green onions, known as scallions in the US and spring onions across the UK and Europe, are one of the most practical, space-efficient crops you can grow in a shaded spot. They take up almost no space, they grow quickly, and they can be harvested repeatedly throughout the season simply by trimming them back to the base and allowing them to regrow. They're perfect as companion plants tucked between larger shade crops, and they add an almost continuous supply of fresh, mild onion flavor to your kitchen with very little effort. Number 14. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is one of those vegetables that confuses people at first glance. It looks like something from another planet, with its bulbous stem and protruding leaves, but it is one of the most delicious, versatile, and shade-friendly crops you can grow. It belongs to the Brassica family alongside cabbage and broccoli, and like its relatives, it genuinely prefers cooler conditions and partial shade. Grow it in a shaded bed and it develops a sweet, crisp, almost apple-like flavor that is completely different from anything most people have tasted. It's well worth growing, and a shadier garden is honestly the perfect place for it. Number 15. Turnips. Turnips are tough, fast-growing, and remarkably well-suited to partial shade. They're a classic cool-weather crop that has been grown across Europe and North America for centuries, and they ask for very little in return. In partial shade, turnips develop their roots steadily without the splitting or toughening that can happen in full sun during warmer months. The greens are also edible. Young turnip tops are tender and nutritious, similar to mustard greens, so you're effectively getting 2 harvests from a single plant in a low-light bed. Number 16. Endive and chicory. Endive and chicory are 2 vegetables that are wildly popular across France, Italy, Belgium, and much of continental Europe, but are significantly underused in the UK and the United States. And that's a genuine shame, because they are outstanding in a shade garden. Both plants naturally prefer cooler, lower light growing conditions. They produce beautifully structured, flavorful leaves with a pleasant bitterness that pairs perfectly with strong cheeses, grilled meats, and warm salads. Shade keeps them from bolting and keeps their flavor balanced. If you want to grow something a little different, something that will genuinely impress guests at the dinner table, endive and chicory in a shaded bed is one of the best choices you can make. Number 17. Sorrel. And finally, sorrel. If you've never grown sorrel before, you are genuinely missing out, and a shaded garden is the ideal place to start. Sorrel is a perennial leafy green, which means you plant it once and it comes back year after year without you having to do anything. It has a bright, citrusy, lemon-like flavor that is unlike almost any other vegetable you can grow at home, and it thrives in partial shade with very little attention. It's popular in French and Eastern European cuisine, increasingly found on restaurant menus across the UK and major American cities, and it is one of the most low-maintenance, high-reward crops a shade gardener can grow. Now that you have your full list of 17 vegetables, let's talk about how to position them strategically in your garden. Because simply knowing what to grow is only half the equation. Knowing where and how to arrange them makes the difference between a shade garden that ticks along and one that genuinely thrives. One of the most powerful and underused tricks in shade gardening is working with the seasonal light calendar. Deciduous trees, the ones that lose their leaves in autumn, create a natural window of opportunity in early spring, before the leaves come back in. During that window, your shaded beds can actually receive close to full sun for several weeks. Use that window deliberately. Plant fast-growing crops like radishes, spinach, and lettuce as early as possible, getting them established and growing before the tree canopy closes back over. By the time the shade returns, those crops are already well-rooted and producing. Another game-changing strategy is the use of reflective surfaces. This sounds more complicated than it is. Something as simple as painting a nearby fence or shed wall white can meaningfully increase the amount of light that reaches a shaded bed. The white surface bounces indirect light onto your plants and adds valuable growing hours without you moving a single pot. Gardeners across the UK and Northern Europe have been using this technique for years, particularly in north-facing gardens where every extra moment of indirect light counts. Spacing also matters more in a shaded garden than in a sunny one. When light is limited, plants will stretch and compete for whatever is available if they're placed too close together. Give your shade crops a little more room than the seed packet suggests. Slightly wider spacing allows each plant to capture as much of that available light as possible without fighting its neighbors for it. And one final thought on placement. If you're growing near mature trees, always amend your soil generously with compost before planting, and consider laying a thick mulch over the surface of your beds. This does 3 important things simultaneously. It retains the moisture your plants need, it suppresses the weeds that compete aggressively for the limited light, and it gradually improves your soil's fertility over time as it breaks down, working against the nutrient depletion that tree root competition causes. Here's something important before we close. If you've made it this far and you haven't subscribed yet, the algorithm has no way of bringing this content back to you. You'll miss the next video, and the one after that. And slowly, all of this knowledge that could be transforming your garden stays just out of reach. One tap on that subscribe button changes all of that. Do it now. Your future garden will thank you for it. Because here's the truth that this entire video has been building toward. The shady corners of your garden are not a limitation. They never were. They are simply growing spaces that have been waiting for the right plants, the right knowledge, and the right gardener to come along and unlock them. Across America, across the UK, across every garden in Europe where space is limited and sunshine is not guaranteed, people are discovering that shade gardening isn't a compromise. It's a completely different and incredibly rewarding way to grow food. Sweeter flavors, longer harvests, healthier plants, less bolting, less bitterness, more consistent, more sustainable, and in many ways more enjoyable than fighting to grow sun-loving crops in spaces that simply can't support them. You now have 17 vegetables, a clear understanding of how shade actually works, the soil knowledge to set your beds up properly, and the placement strategies to maximize every inch of your low-light space. Everything you need to transform those forgotten corners into something genuinely productive is right here. So go back, take notes, pick the vegetables that match your specific shade conditions, and get started. Your shaded garden has been waiting long enough. If this video helped you see your garden differently, please give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more gardeners who need this information. Share it with someone who's been struggling with a shady growing space, because you might just change how they garden forever. Leave a comment below and tell us which of these 17 vegetables you're most excited to try. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you're still on the fence, just know that every video you've watched on this channel and walked away from without subscribing is a video series you've disconnected yourself from. We don't want that for you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll see you in the next one.